Right, hello, greetings. Okay, part 2 of my Sunday Philosophy Club talk here, coming up to the end of October, and I promised to look at the solutions. I've talked in the first half about the problems of identity conflict, and I've given various names for that, psychologically and so on. So what's the solution? This is what I looked at in my PhD thesis, but I didn't know I'd have to be applying it to so many. I thought, I suppose naively, I thought that common sense and reason and rationality and philosophy would have worked itself through the system and we wouldn't be having all these conflicts. But, we are where we are. So what's the solution? Okay. Firstly, confronted with a map of conflicting identities, you have to search for what is universal between them. That's the first kind of procedure. You have to go beyond smaller identities and build out towards cosmic identities. Because, these lives that we live are actually very short from a cosmic perspective. I've been around a few decades and I'll live hopefully a few more, but all our lifespans are pretty short, and compared to the history of mountains or great forests or river systems, if you look at how nature is so incredibly cosmic in its time span, and also if you look at the history of great civilizations and cultures. I live in a little village that was at least already here by the 1100s, and this Gallo-Roman civilization that it's part of had been around since 1,000 years or so before that. It's a long time, and so you have to extend your identity, I think, to realise that we are the inheritor of all those cosmic eons. As Timothy Leary and others always pointed out, within my atoms, the atoms of my DNA and my cells are ancient beings that came together in the very earliest phases of evolution, and I depend on them all for my own existence. I'm a product of all their micro-identities, and all my ancestors, all my parents and grandparents and great-great-grandparents, going right back to the earliest Paleolithic European cultures of 30, 40, 60,000 BC, which you have here in the Dordogne, in the cave-dwelling cultures of Lascaux. These were highly intelligent, art-loving, music-loving, God and goddess-loving people. And they left traces of this in their incredible artwork at places like Lascaux. So, and this is why I love the Druid traditions of European culture, prehistory, going back to Avebury and Stonehenge, who were, I believe, the inheritors of the Lascaux Magdalenian cultures. There's direct links from the Paleolithic art forms through to Druidical legends and so on in Ireland and elsewhere. So that is all part of my identity. And so you can look at it geographically and also historically by taking a cross-section through time. My parents went to the Grand Canyon when they first fell in love and travelled around America in the 40s. I think it was 48 they got to the Grand Canyon. And my mother recorded in her diaries, which I've been reading, they were awestruck by the depth and the how far down they go. And they were told by the guides that this had all been cut by the Colorado River, which just cut this canyon over millennia. And my father, I think, was particularly bowled over by it because he had a great love of science and what Nehru called the scientific temperament, which we put in the Constitution of the World Wisdom Forum, by the way. This idea that we should think of things through a scientific lens. My father was a great lover of that, which I think he passed on to me, and we should be awestruck by, we are the inheritors of all that. And that's why we should take it as so precious and not destroy and damage and harm either the environment or each other. So I think that's something else we have to do. I think we have to find enlightenment, which is beyond the layerings of ego. Okay, so, I mean, I have a history of identities, which are multi-layered. I was born in Montreal, I'm a Canadian citizen, I have a Canadian identity, my first few years spent in Canada, thinking of myself as a good Canadian. I travelled back there in the 70s, loved it, I love Canada, it's my other home, I am a Canadian in my soul. Maybe I've had past lives in Canada and North America, I'm sure I have. I know the feeling there, I know the scent of the trees in all the different seasons. So my identity is partly North American. But then we came back to England. I grew up in Sussex. I enjoyed travelling around all the medieval churches of Sussex and learning about the history of Brighthelmstone and the Weald and Rottingdean. And, I threw myself into the project of becoming a good English boy. I went to Brighton College, which is, a very good school. And I was taught the idea that a good English boy is truthful, honest, law-abiding, kind, gracious, helpful, sort of Boy Scouts type of thing, although I wasn't technically a Boy Scout. But it was that sort of idea, old-fashioned now, of actually that it's one's duty to tell the truth and to work for peace and for righteousness and justice between all the citizens of the Commonwealth, as we were taught. Well, I still do that. I run the Commonwealth Interfaith Network. I still believe in that project. And I thought that's what Britain was about. I thought that's what the Church of England was about. That's why I later joined it when I was baptised. I felt that that project of justice and truth and goodness is what actually being English is all about. And being part of this bigger project called the United Kingdom, which is awesome. That's why I'm so appalled when I see that it's been fallen into the hands of thieves who think that it's about lying, scheming, personal power, manipulation, ignorance of facts, and just, total dog-eat-dog kind of mentality. So that became part of my identity, that will to goodness, I think, that was inculcated in me from an early age in Brighton. And then we went to France a lot. We travelled there every summer. My mother was a French and Latin teacher. I studied Latin for 7 years. I thought of myself as a European. I knew that I was an inheritor of this really profound culture. I studied Greek and Roman history for my A-level in ancient history. I felt, God, I'm not just English, I'm European. I belong to this bigger thing called classical civilization. I'm the inheritor of the thoughts of Plato and Socrates and Aristotle. And I began to study philosophy. I realised I was a inheritor of all this rich layers of cultural identity. And it was just awesome. We used to come to France every summer. I would go to Paris and learn French poetry and French literature. And I realised, well, I'm sort of Franco-British, European, lover of the world, cosmopolitan. We had many Jewish friends growing up in Brighton and in Montreal, and most of my best friends were Jewish. They were highly intelligent, kind, loving, generous. They were people whose parents or ancestors had died in the Holocaust, and they made it to escape to Britain or Canada, and they were my brothers and sisters, and I always felt at one with them. I didn't literally understand what the concept of anti-Semitism could possibly mean. I still don't. And so that was also part of my identity. And then I studied Christianity in great depth and became a Quaker and an Anglican, and I said, no, okay, I want to be part of this Kingdom of God project. I'm on that team as well. I'm a light worker. And so that became part of my identity. But then I I thought, yeah, well, there's things about what the official church does I don't agree with, so I'm more of a Gnostic. I'm more on the Buddhist wing of the Christians, so I'm a Buddhist as well. I believe in karma, I believe in reincarnation, I believe in working out the ethical consequences of your actions before time so you don't make mistakes. So I became a Buddhist initiate as well. And then I read the Quran in depth. I read it right through with love and attention to detail, and I said, well, actually, I think I'm a Muslim. I think I'm really a Sufi. I love this God of the Quran because he's come in to try and unite everyone in peace and tranquility. Shekinah, the mysterious tranquility that descends. And the more I read about Sufism and met Sufis and met practicing Sufis, I identified. I said, look, I'm one of your brothers too. So that became part of my identity. And so on and so on and so on. But ultimately, all these identities are just like clouds that are passing. I could have incarnated on a totally different planet, probably have, numerous times, would have a totally different periodic table, totally different spiritual teachers. The map of the clouds would all be different. What would be the core that would be the same? The empty sky. The perfect night sky. Whichever planet you're on, as long as it can support human lifetime forms, then that's what you've got. You've got a sky full of beautiful stars twinkling away. And I think that beyond our individual identity of the circumstances of our narrow birth opportunities, if I'd have been born in China or Israel or Timbuktu, I would have had different colour skin, different costumes, different languages. But I think, and the same with all of us who are here in incarnation on this planet, but I think that our core identity is what we bring to the incarnation each time. It's our soul vehicle that we come in with. And that's, to use Wordsworth's phrase, that's the trailing clouds of glory that we come in with. And that there's so much evidence now from the Scientific and Medical Network and all its allies that you can access these pre-birth memories, that I think we can now say scientifically it's proven that the soul survives death and precedes birth, which is what the greatest philosophers have always been saying. But now we can prove that. So identity is what is formed and structured, like the Grand Canyon, over many, many eons of incarnational process. And that's what the wisdom teachers of mankind have always said. That's what theosophists like Ammonius Saccas, great Alexandrian sage that coined the word theosophy, always said. It's what Plato said. It's what the mysteries of Demeter and Persephone at Eleusis inculcated on those who attended it and were fortunate enough to. And most of the great Athenian and Greek intellectuals went to the mysteries at Eleusis. I've been myself, only there was no one around. It was an archaeological park, but I kind of did a mini mysteries of my own. I think they should be restarted, by the way. At the original venue, we should have the Eleusinian mysteries revived, as the Delphic Games should be, which is why I work for that. So we have layers of identity, and the more we look into them, the more, do some past life regressions with a trained professional, find out more about your many identities. You'll be much more humble, much less willing to attack and destroy and kill. Perhaps if you're in conflict with people, it's some past life thing that's been overheld. I mean, I dread to think what Putin was in a past life. He needs some past life therapy, and to get with the wisdom program instead of the let's bomb the other program. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying is we have to accept we have multiple identities. So instead of identity conflict, we have identity peacemaking through realization of the multiplicity of our identities. And they coexist. But in the Buddhist parlance, we talk about the coexistence, mutual coexistence of things. the multiple interdependence of varying factors. And so Ukrainianism and Russianism are mutually co-penetrating dharmas. And it's not a sort of either or. It's like saying, are you with the left arm or the right arm? They're mutually interpenetrating and mutually coexisting, co-determining. And so if we can accept this multiplicity of identities, and we can seriously look at Buddhist insight over the last 2,500 years, because Buddhist meditational experts and metaphysicians have gone into this in great detail. They've broken through into the Enlightenment zones, beyond ego, beyond this me, my, and my defense mechanism stuff, to a place of us, to a place of we, to a place of awakening, where we don't have to defend, but rather we inhabit mudita, which is sympathetic joy for one another's enlightenment. And this, I think, is the path to go down. This is the transpersonal solution to these identity conflicts. And it's interesting that in the earliest phase of communism in Russia, there was an attempt by some of the most intelligent of the Bolsheviks to actually embrace Buddhist metaphysics. Nicholas Roerich was one of them, but there were others, as explained in the wonderful history, Red Shambhala, by an American academic, which is worth reading, about that attempt to create a sort of communist blend with Vajrayana teachings. And I think that's worth revisiting and should be done still. Be a much better project than Putinist, Russianist grandiosity brought on bombs from, the arsenals. No, Red Shambhala can only be built non-violently, as was Buddhism in the beginning, as is any Dharmic teaching worth having. Violence is always a kind of resistance to identity transformation, whereas the wise sage accepts identity transformation as the law of being. It's the dialectic of being. Things turn into their opposites, So, and I've had some people qualified in these fields tell me that often in intractable conflicts, like Israeli-Palestinian or Christian-Muslim or, whatever, different people incarnate into the opposite. So they take on the role of being the enemy. So Russians reincarnate as Nazis, Nazis reincarnate as Russians. The whole wheel goes on until you step back out of the conflict of identities and you enter the centre of the wheel, which is nirvana. It's what Buddha talked about. At the centre of the turning of the wheel is the insight zone where that gnosis of unity, what Christ called the kingdom of God, dwells. And it's as tiny as a mustard seed. But that's where we actually should be located. So we're not swept up by the turbulent tornadoes of identity conflict. Once we do that, we also get the insight of what's called paradoxical simultaneity. This is a Druid phrase for the seeing of all these multiple identities all at once. And it's connected with this idea in Druidry of animal shape-shifting. Merlin can become the hawk, can become the salmon, can become, the tiny grain of seed, or Taliesin can. These wonderful Druid stories, teaching stories, are about multiple transformations. That's about paradoxical simultaneity. I am the boy Taliesin, and I am Ceridwen, who is chasing me, simultaneously. I am the lesson I'm learning from that encounter. And these poems by Taliesin and Emergin and the other great Druid bards are about the complexity of the I am. I am the wave, I am the steer, I am the sun, I am a word of magic, I am the word of science, seen in splendour. The I am is all these things simultaneously, and that's the insight level these Druids got to, where you can't pin them down into simplicity, And that, my friend, is the solution to conflict. That's why the Druids were able to mediate the conflicts of the Celtic tribes, because they could teach the warriors to see that too, and the beauty of that. And they still do, I'm the Peace Druid of Europe, trying to teach the tribes to make love and not war. Love, by the way, is the wonderful experience of paradoxical simultaneity. It's realizing the other is another self, like you. You're one being. That is this experience of falling in love that we all love so much. It's the insight into the metaphysics of this, that what I'm talking about, paradoxical simultaneity. Another way to say this, and in this philosophy class we've looked at the 3 jewels of Shintoism, which was a class a few weeks ago. The sword, standing for the mind, the intellect. The jewel, the magatama. And the mirror. One way of saying is we'll solve these identity crises when we internalize the wisdom of the 3 jewels. Shintoism is primal Japanese spirituality, like Druidry is that of Britain and the British Isles and Gaul and a lot of Western Europe. And there's very similar insights there. The Shintos understood that intellect is necessary. That's the sword. We have to think clearly and rationally. But we have to honour the jewel, the spiral, the magatama, which is like a kinky spiral shape, like a seahorse, and which is a specific jewel kept in the shrine at Ise in Japan. That stands for the embryo. We are the magatama made manifest, and how wonderful. But we also are the mirror, which is this calmness, this equanimity, the shunya. That's why they took to Zen and Buddhist teachings, because the Japanese Shintoists already knew instinctively that we are just the mirror for the light. We're not the light ourselves. The light is transcendental, transpersonal, divine. Each one of us is a partial mirror for the absolute. And so in the shrine at Ise they keep the mirror, which is God's gift to us from Great Spirit, the kami, the gods, to teach us humility and perfection so that we can polish our consciousness so we reflect goodness back to each other and to the gods, because that's why they've created us, to be good in their image, not to make wars and conflict and nuclear weapons and Hiroshimas and Pearl Harbors and all that. No, to be good, honest, truthful, loving, generous people. As most of the people I've met are. I don't know where the crew that are running the planet have come from. So that's another way of putting it. Or to say, to solve the identity crises, we have to flow and realise that the Tao is a process of ever-flowingness that flows through us. We shouldn't, why be stuck on an identity when it can flow and change tomorrow? I mean, tomorrow I might convert to, I don't know, something else. I think I've converted to most things in my time, so there's not much left to convert to, but some new thing might appear, some new teaching, and I'll transform and flow into that. We should always be open to the newness of the now, because that now is the eternal Tao. Since I've been speaking in this philosophy class, this whole planet, this whole room has moved thousands of miles in relation to absolute space. We're a constant flow. And inside my body, making this talk possible, are myriads of swirling atoms, electrons, neutrons, everything in like flowing form, cloud form. There's nothing stuck here, there's nothing static. It's all a dialectical process of flow. And if once you realise that, then how can you possibly want to define yourself in a narrow shape? Oh, I'm British, I hate Europe, I'm for Brexit. Or, some sort of narrow little boxed-inness like that. Another way of saying this is that we should accept the infinite numeration of the divine mind. This is a more Neoplatonic kind of way. If you look at arithmology and the wonderful work of mathematics, look at the great mathematicians of history, Newton and so on, and read my book on the philosophical principles of religious mathematics, which is a sequel to Newton. I think another way of saying this is that number is infinite and it's constantly moving. Every number is an evolving process. As I said, there are billions, trillions of electrons just speaking to you now. There are trillions listening to me, hopefully. It's made possible through electronic complexities involving trillions of electronic interplays. So I think in humility, accepting this infinite numeration of existence brings a sort of joy, actually, because knowing that, we can never know the number, we can never know exactly, it's an unknowable, actually. For instance, how many electrons actually exactly are simmering away in me and you and in between us. We can never know that number, but it does exist, it must exist, therefore it has to, as Berkeley said, exist in the mind of God. We can only say that the container in which all the movement and process is happening is somehow what I call the divine mind. We have to accept the infinite numeration of the divine mind. I heard a very brilliant lecture by a young scientist who teaches at the Royal Institution in London, a very great institution that was set up by Faraday and others back in the Victorian era when they were really excited about science, as they should have been. He said something very interesting, which is that science hasn't learned how to tag electrons. Unlike other things, you can have traces and so on. You can't do it with electrons. They move too fast, there are too many of them. You can't sort of pick one up individually, pin a badge to it, and then watch where it goes. You can't tag electrons. And he went further. He said that what appears to be the case is that electrons, as we call them, are just localized ripples in space-time of forces that are indescribable and unknowable in the Higgs boson field, which then localize out as an electron for this brief flash of passage as it hurtles through at near the speed of light. And that ultimately they're all the same thing. So each electron, be it one of the ones talking to you now, or you, or out the other side of the galaxy, it's actually the same thing. It's ripples, little wavelets in the same, in the same continuum, the same field. And the same with photons. Anyway, that I think is very interesting, and that fits in with my concept that we have to accept this infinite numerization of the divine mind at play. We're the playing operators of that divine mind. Another way to say this is we have to accept the complexity and system behind what the Kabbalah calls the Sephiroth. And I have somewhere, you've seen it before, a wonderful poster of the Kabbalistic tree of life, the Sephiroth. Now that's an early theosophical Jewish understanding of this system in operation. It's like a pictorial representation of the complexity of being as it operates. Let me see if I can find the actual poster. Right, so if you've not seen this, it's one of my favourite things. bought it years ago in Oklahoma, at the Sancta Sophia Seminary, a wonderful esoteric centre where I taught for a while. You see the different Sephiroth, all interconnected, and how they interrelate. This is the essence of the Kabbalah. And to study all that is to study the interconnectedness of being. And this was an intuitive metaphysical understanding that these ancient sages realized, Abraham, Moses. It's the oral teaching that predated the written biblical text in the Hebrew alphabet. This is an oral teaching, which I've been fortunate to study over many years with great sages. So that's another way of putting it. We have to appreciate that panoply of the Sephirotic system and understand its complexity and study it, because it's then reflected in the findings of modern science, modern psychology, modern theology and metaphysics. Okay, so another way to say what is the solution is to find the universal consciousness within us all, which appreciates all the diverse forms of wisdom. So just as you can study the periodic table and find wisdom in each of the boxes, so within all the philosophical and religious and metaphysical systems of the planet, there is wisdom there to learn. I went to a wonderful exhibition in Ljubljana of artifacts lent from the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg a couple of years ago, from the shamanic traditions of Central Asia, the Siberian tribes, explored in the 19th century by great Russian anthropologists. And they're all in the Hermitage. And, you know, these are tools, working tools that I as a Druid can understand and use. They're universal in their meaning, and these great Siberian shamans, as Mircea Eliade pointed out, have been working at this for thousands of years. You know, they're the same as the Druids here in Western Europe, but over there in Siberia, there's only one ultimate sort of wisdom lineage, and what we can do is appreciate all the diverse forms of it. I don't want to bomb my Siberian brothers and sisters. They shouldn't want to bomb me or my Ukrainian brothers and sisters. We should be sitting down and learning wisdom from each other. That is the solution to these identity wars. Realizing we're part of a bigger Buddha nature or cosmic consciousness. We can use the periodic table, therefore, to show us a map of these traditions, realizing their commonalities, their differential natures. And we can realize it's a bit like music, actually. A bit like Hesse's insight in the glass bead game, which was a kind of music of ideas. So if I compare and contrast, say, Shintoism with Taoism, or with Shia Islam, or with Gnosticism, or Kabbalah and so on, I'm listening to different musical tonalities, which are all like variations of a common theme, like the Goldberg variations. And I'm not going to argue this variation's better than that one. They're all beautiful, and they're all coming from this infinite array of numeration that I talked about. Right, so, okay, that's it. How do we then apply all this? That's the solution, but, okay, how do we get that out to the masses? How do we apply the solution? Well, we can work with the World Wisdom Forum, which we've set up, a variation of the World Intellectual Forum, which kind of has done some good work, but I think we need to deepen it, and we've renamed it the World Wisdom Forum. We can work with the Commonwealth Interfaith Network, which I run, set up in '97, still run as a Canadian Brit.